When love turns into a weapon, will guilt becomes a chain, how do you break free? In this episode, we're diving into one of the most insidious tactics of emotional abuse, suicide manipulation. We'll break down the red flags, expose the psychological traps, and give you the tools to protect yourself while still caring for your own well-being. If you've ever felt trapped by someone else's threat, this episode is for you. Let's talk about it because awareness is power. Are you tired of the bull? Welcome to the Matadoras, No More Bull podcast. I'm Lizzie, and with me is Deana. We're the co-founders, and our mission is to empower women to recognize toxic relationships, escape safely, and heal.
All right. So today's episode is a bit deep and heavy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say. But you know what? I think it's really important to talk about it. And this is why. So many women, men, anybody you can think of have been manipulated by really, really insidious threats of suicide. Now, it's a really tricky situation, right? Because you never know if someone is serious about committing suicide or not. So as a disclaimer, Lizzie and I are just going to say, we are not therapists. We are not telling you what to do and what not to do. We're going to take some expert from Domestic Violence Hotline website. And we're also going to talk about our own experiences and what we did. And just some signs in general that you might be dealing with manipulation versus a real threat. But no matter what, any threat of suicide has to be handled very delicately, and it has to be handled as if it is real. You can't take that chance, okay? So just putting that out there. This is just our story, and this is not telling you exactly what to do. So here we go. Is it real suicide threat or is it manipulation? It's really shocking to think about how many times that an abuser will use various tactics, whether it be gaslighting or manipulation or lying or any other kind of manipulation. But this one gets really tricky. Ironically, both Lizzie and I have experienced this type of manipulation. And it was with our same ex. And so Lizzie's going to start with her story about what happened and how she was manipulated with Rex. We call him our ex. And then we'll move on from there.
Yeah. So when I was knowing something was going on with Rex and he was like leaving all the time, I was really hurting, really broken, not sure what was going on. And he came home one night with some flowers. And I was like, this isn't the point. I don't need flowers. It's something deep. And I was angry. That anger, that hurt anger, I think you would call it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And for some reason, he went and sat on the floor in the kitchen, pulled out his gun, and sat there. And I was in a state of shock. I wasn't sure what to do. And then he talked about suicide, that he should just take his life because it'd sure make it better for everybody else if he was gone.
Now, I'm sensing that the reason he did this is because he got a feel that you were thinking about leaving.
Yes. And then
because you had found some things, you had seen some things over the years, you had, caught him in some things, and he was starting to sense that you were withdrawing.
Yep.
And potentially leaving, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So he got desperate.
So in that aspect, I really was not trained or had no tools of what to do next. So here I am in my broken state, in my broken heart. I'm sitting here trying to make sure this person does not take their life. So was that manipulation? I, in this situation, was not equipped enough to deal with it. What I would have done now would have been a little bit different for sure.
But what did you do?
What did I do?
Yeah, what did you do? Because you obviously were completely dumbfounded, had no idea what to do. He sat on the floor with a gun, started talking about taking his life right in front of you. What did you do?
I tried to console him and told him how much he was worth it and what a great person he was. And so it flipped my grief, my heartache, and it became time for me to pacify him, to make him feel better. So it took the spotlight off of what I was going through and put it on him, is what I felt like it truly was, like a couple of days later. And then, yeah.
And by the way, he had a habit. I was with him for 27 years. He had a habit of somehow always flipping the script so that he became the victim, even though he was the perpetrator, even though what you were upset about was something he had done, and maybe even something egregious, like, be with another woman. And he would still flip the script, and somehow you were now consoling him and now feeling bad for him. And it was magic how he did it. It was just magic. Mm-hmm. So this was a common thing that he did, a common tool he used. The suicide was sort of one of the big arsenal, when you bring out the big bomb to make sure that something goes the way you want it to.
Yeah.
So with my situation with him, over the 27 years, it happened several times. Now, here's where I feel like you can look at a situation, and again, you still have to handle every situation as if it's real. But if you start to see a pattern where this person is only threatening suicide when you are about to leave, when you caught them doing something, when you confronted them with something, when they realize that you're backing away from the relationship, and all of a sudden they're pulling this big stunt of they want to commit suicide. When you start seeing those types of patterns, it's giving you a good clue. This could be manipulation. This may not be suicide. The usual signs of suicide are someone who, not just because you've left or done something else, okay? It's usually someone who has frequented depression in their life. They've talked about feeling hopeless. They've talked about death a lot. They've talked about guilt or shame. They feel like they're a burden to other people. They feel hopeless, worthless, or trapped. Those kinds of things, if those are repeating and not just a behavior response, but an actual personality and, kind of dealing with their demons response, and this is always how they're feeling, that's kind of what sets us apart. And if you're really looking at someone who, they're trying to get out of a situation, they're trying to like make it, get out and be okay. And they're trying to manipulate you to feel sorry for them, to stay, to not follow through with what you're doing. Any kind of manipulation is a form of abuse. And that comes from the National Domestic Violence Hotline. They call this abuse if it is being used for those purposes. So how do we look at this? We have to really understand that some of the most important things, and we'll talk about 3 steps that you need to do when somebody is threatening to commit suicide and you are seeing a real pattern of manipulation, not a genuine, honest cry for help. And the first thing is to stick to your boundaries. Boundaries are very, very important. And again, this is from the Domestic Violence Hotline. So we're not taking it from our own information. This is a reputable site for these things. So number 1 is stick to your boundaries. If they say, if you leave me, I'm going to commit suicide, the proper response would be, I really care about you, but neither of us should want to be in a relationship where we are just staying so that one person doesn't do something egregious like this. I really care about you and I don't want that to happen. And that's a really important thing, because you really need to not only let them know that you care about their well-being, but that you also are going to separate you from them and their choices. The second thing that is important to do would be to put the choice to live or die in the hands of the other person. Sounds scary and terrible, because especially if you've been in a toxic relationship, you always feel responsible for everything. What they do, what you do, what happens, outcomes, you feel responsible for all of it. So this is a tough one, but it's really important that they understand that you let them know in a kind, gentle way that you can't be responsible for their actions to their own body. However, clearly there's an issue, and clearly there's some mental health that needs to happen, and you will call the suicide hotline for them. You will get them help. whatever you need to do, but that really truly that you're not responsible for their behavior. That kind of goes along with the boundaries. And then lastly, if they tell you, if you love me, you will stop me from killing myself, or you'll do what I say, or you'll come back to me, or you'll stop, confronting me about what I'm doing. If they give these kinds of threats, you have to make sure that you understand, number 3, you don't have to prove anything. If this person is allowed to threaten you to stay with them every single time anything goes down because they're threatening suicide, this tool will be used over and over and over again. And it is not your burden to prove anything to them. So any suicide threat signals a mental health problem. As a matter of fact, psychologists say that someone who threatens suicide are actually diagnostic criteria for borderline personality disorder. If they are doing this on a regular basis, that is one of the things they measure to see if this person has personality disorder. So no matter what reason it's happening, whether it's real and legit and they're dealing with depression, or they've just come to the end of their rope, or whether they are manipulating you, it's the same type of tactic. You need to actually just, again, be caring, let them know it's their responsibility, you will help, but it's not your job to rescue them from themselves. So what is recommended would be the question, persuade, and refer process. What that means is if you're dealing with somebody who is threatening suicide, the first thing you want to do is calm them down by questioning them. Why do you feel this way? Why do you feel this is something you want to do? Really try to seek to understand where they're at. And the second thing would be persuade them to get help for this. Mm-hmm. Because again, no matter what, whether it's a manipulation tactic and they're just messing with you and they're bluffing you, that is a mental health disorder. If it's real and they're depressed and they're just lonely and they're upset and they're mad at themselves or whatever reason, you still need to do the question, persuade, and refer. So persuade them, I'm going to call the suicide hotline for you, or you need to get mental help. We're going to call your therapist. Or if there's a trusted loved one in their family, we're going to call mom. We're going to call your sister. And then lastly, refer. Make sure that you refer them to somewhere for them to go for help. You cannot be their rescue. You cannot be their help. You are not qualified. Even if you are a therapist, you are not qualified to help that person because you are too close to the situation. They have to be referred to a mental health specialist. Now, people that are bluffing you and manipulating you and controlling you, that's not what they want to hear. So that's another way to kind of see where they're at here. They're not trying to get help. Okay. Lastly, don't belittle or berate them when they come to you and say they want to commit suicide. Don't get angry. Don't say you're just lying. You're just, manipulating me. Don't do any of that. Again, treat everything as if it might be real, and do the following things that we suggested. Last thing, my situation that happened with the same ex-husband, actually I had multiple situations, but I think the one that was most dramatic and awful was at the very end of our 27-year relationship, when once again I discovered that he had somebody else and was cheating, and I was done. I was just done beyond done. Our children were grown. There was just no reason to stay anymore. And that's when I told him that I couldn't do this anymore, and we were done. And I actually had no emotion about it. And normally I'd be crying or weeping or angry, but I just came to the end of my rope, and I told him very matter-of-factly that this was done. And it took a while. He went through all the stages of begging and pleading and crying, confessing, threatening, stalking, angry, furious. And then finally, when none of that worked, because I was gone emotionally, I get a phone call one day, and he calls me hysterical, and he said, I am driving right now and I'm about to drive off a cliff. And I just hope you know that I'm going to die. And he's sobbing hysterically. And he's like, I loved you and you wouldn't take me back and you didn't care about me, but I loved you, and tell the kids this and tell the kids that. And he's hysterical. And again, I've been through this many times, and I was so over it because I realized finally that he was just yanking my chain to get what he wanted. But this time felt different. This time felt scary, and it felt really real, because at this point he had lost everything, where before I would always come back. And I didn't know what to do. And I was just like, I was trying to convince him to stop. This is not what you need to do. Please don't. And he hung up on me. And of course, he wouldn't answer the phone. I called and called and called and called. I didn't know what to do. I knew he was on his way to work, and I had no idea what to do. So luckily, I was friends with and knew his boss. And I called his boss. And I explained to him what happened. And of course, now I'm hysterical. I'm crying. I'm sobbing. Because, I mean, I'm leaving this person for what he's done and the awful things I've been through, but I still cared about him. And his boss was horrified and upset. And I said, please call me and let me know. Please let me know when he makes it to work, because I don't know what to do. He might be driving off a cliff. He might not make it. And it was probably about an hour later that his boss called me and said, he's here. He's acting normal. He's acting like nothing happened. And he goes, I called him into my office and gave him a good talking to. That was the most horrible, inappropriate thing you could do to any human. And after that was it. But I'll tell you, the anxiety and the emotional pain and the exhaustion and the stress this causes, it should not happen to anybody. But I've heard many stories of not just partners or spouses, but children, siblings, friends doing these kinds of things. And it's hard to know if they're not your close significant other, if this was manipulation or not. But it's still just a horrible, horrible thing to do to anybody. So please keep these things in mind. Do the QPR. Understand that you never know if someone's serious or not, no matter how many times they've done this. But truly, the responsibility for their life relies on them, and their help relies on them. All you can do is do what you can to lead them where they need to go, so that you feel that you did what you could.
Yeah. And know that you're not alone, that this happens all the time. So you just have to learn the signs, and educating yourself does give you power to know the next steps you need to take. And it's okay if you call the suicide hotline just to share your concerns. They're there to help you and anyone that may be a victim to these suicidal ideations, because they are very real for many people. And so that's why this topic, I think, was really heavy for us, because it's one you don't really want to talk about, but it's a really hard topic, because how do people receive it?
Yeah.
How does it trigger? But the bottom line is, you're not alone. Make sure you're always in a safe place. If you don't feel safe, then you need to listen to those red flags, because your safety is number one. We appreciate you guys.